So let's go ahead and dive in. So we're talking today about secondary interventions in secondary settings, or in 6 through 12 schools. Today we're going to do a lot of setting context and talking about purpose of interventions in secondary schools. And we're going to talk about how you can ensure that your sites are able to enact this process for your students. We want to learn what effective practices are and how to implement them, but we also want to make sure that these are research based. So a lot of the information that you're going to learn today and all of the sessions that come after this session will be kind of derived from the MTSS model, or the multi-tiered systems of support, which actually Wendy is working on lots of guidance about MTSS that's going to come out very soon. So that's going to kind of go hand in hand with what we're talking about today. So whenever you are looking at the stuff that she puts out, kind of keep in mind that this is where a lot of that information is coming from. Just it's going to be a more focused lens of how do we apply it to our 6 through 12 spaces. Because we know that we have middle and high school students that come to us with challenges in reading. We know that they're expected as they move through these upper grades and higher and out into the workforce or into secondary settings, post-secondary settings, that they are going to be asked to read increasingly more complex text, and not just in their ELA classrooms, but across all content areas. So it's really important that we're able to address these challenges for these students, that they are also able to access grade level content, because they are just as entitled to accessing that grade level content as their peers who may not have the same reading struggles. So this series is meant to kind of address all of that. I have 6 kind of just overarching goals that we want to be able to accomplish by the end of all of the sessions. We will not be talking about all 6 of these today, but just so you have an idea of kind of where this is all going. We want to be able to identify which students in 6 through 12 may need interventions. We want to be able to identify the tools that we can use for screening those students, for diagnosing specific skills that those students may need support in. We want to identify the steps after we administer diagnostic testing, and what those intervention best practices are and what they look like in a secondary setting. We want to be able to analyze our intervention materials that are based on the needs of our students, identify time, space, purpose for intervention. That includes things like schedules, small group versus actual intensive intervention, progress monitoring, and intervening based on need, and then developing an understanding of how intervention should function, look, and be implemented in a secondary setting. So basically, by the end of this 4-part little series, you should have the foundational knowledge to kind of get literacy intervention programs going on your campuses in secondary work. And just as one more reminder, I know some of you kind of came in late. We are doing this live, but will also be available asynchronously for anybody who has the code for you guys to hop back and refer back to, or anybody on your campuses. So I have a little plug there just as a reminder for you guys. So today specifically, we're going to be looking at identifying which students in 6 through 12 potentially need interventions, and then identifying which tools to use for screening those students and diagnosing those students for any specific skills that they may need help with to make sure that they're able to access that grade level content. Today, we will be going into breakout rooms a little bit later. There is a link on there for breakout room handouts, but if you're in the professional learning platform, you'll be able to access a PDF of that handout when the time comes. If you are not able to log into this, we will drop it into the chat when it is time for us to get into the breakouts. Otherwise, I just ask that you keep an open mind. You may want to have something to take a couple of notes on, and then just do your best to participate actively when it is appropriate. And so before we actually get started, I would like to know, before we dive into the material, just take a moment to reflect on how you feel currently, before we've done any of this, on your understanding of implementing intervention in secondary settings, and more specifically, how you feel about today's focus objectives, which are identifying which students in 612 potentially need interventions, and then identifying which tools to use for screening and diagnosing specific skills of concern in grades 6 through 12. So if you're in the platform, I want you to just take a moment to go ahead and answer this. I'm not going to put anybody's answers up on the screen or anything. This is mostly so we can kind of gauge where you guys are before we start all of this, and then we'll reassess when we get to the end of like how you feel about this process. So just take about 30 seconds to put your answer down. Okay. And then one more, you guys all can click that you are participating in the live webinar session. So you can all press A. This is just also for us on the back end to kind of see where people were when they took the course. So we can kind of see if there's any gaps that need to be filled in along the way. So just all of you that are here today, you can go ahead and select A. Okay. So let's start off today talking about setting up some context for secondary interventions and what they should look like and why we want to do them. We want to have this context because we want to understand purpose of intervention in secondary spaces, and so that we can have a really strategic process on our campuses that allows us to reach the most students and reach those students' specific needs so that we can see the most growth from those students. So this information we're going to cover in the first part of today is going to just set a foundation for you to have a better understanding of how to implement reading intervention best practices. It's, again, aligned to that MTSS framework that we'll have some guidance on very soon in the coming weeks for you guys to look at. And it's meant to improve student outcomes through data-driven decision making. So we don't want kids to come into our room and we say, hey, they're struggling with reading. I'm just going to do some interventions with them. We want to know what specifically are they having issues with when they're reading that we can address and support them with to help them access our grade level content. And we need to do that through data-driven decision making. So we'll talk about the different data points that we'll want to use to be able to identify those students and their specific needs. And it's just meant to be a framework to help you work through all of that. So we want to make sure that we're addressing those diverse literacy needs, but this is also meant to be proactive. The more that we're able to use this data-driven decision making, the more that we are able to kind of address issues or challenges before they even arise, as much as possible. So we want to be more proactive than we are reactive whenever possible when it comes to this type of work. And it is all aligned to the science of reading, so we know that it's very well researched and backed with good information. So the outline here, or the student outcomes, if you notice, this kind of graphic kind of encompasses everything that has to do with MTSS. At the center is student outcomes. And then from there, we have all of the different components that really will contribute to the best student outcomes here. Things like collaboration and communication, using data to drive instruction, using tiered interventions, which we will talk about quite a bit in this series, and then professional development and continuous improvement. So those are all things that are part of the MTSS framework. We're going to focus a lot on that tiered system of support, though. I also want to make sure that you guys all have a working definition of these terms. You're going to hear these terms a lot throughout the next 4 sessions. So you'll hear the term universal literacy screener, or you might hear universal screener, or you might hear literacy screener. They all kind of are interchangeable. That all refers to an assessment that students will take to assess their risk of reading difficulties. You'll hear me say diagnostic a lot. This is going to be an assessment that we use to diagnose the exact skills that an individual student might need support with. You'll hear oral reading fluency probe, or ORF probe. That is to assess a student's fluency and allow the teacher to see the accuracy and the rate a student possesses when they are reading a text. It also refers to how many words correct per minute the student is reading and how fast or slow, which also brings us to WCPM, or words correct per minute. You'll see all of those pretty frequently throughout the course. So I just wanted to make sure that you all knew what definition we would be working off of as we move forward. So let's look at Scarborough's reading rope, and I'm going to make this a little bit bigger for you so you guys can see it. And some of you may have seen this before on other sessions you've been on, or other trainings and PD that you've attended. This may be new for some of you as well. So I just kind of want to quickly breeze over what it is before we move on. So Scarborough's reading rope is just a visual representation of all the different components that a person needs to be a skilled reader. So there's kind of 2 different categories. At the top, I have in a box language comprehension, and the bottom is word recognition. And within those 2 categories, there are some other strands that all weave together into a rope to create a skilled reader. Word recognition is things like phonological awareness. You're talking about syllables, decoding with alphabetic principle, and sight recognition of familiar words. Those are things that our students typically learn in those lower grades in K2, K3, where they're learning to read. And then for a lot of us in secondary, most of us are living in this language comprehension area where we're talking about background knowledge with our students a lot. We're looking at vocabulary, language structures, metaphors, inferences, so part of like verbal reasoning and literacy knowledge. That's where most of our curriculum, most of our instruction as secondary ELA teachers typically happens. That's not to say, though, that we're not going to get students who have challenges with word recognition in middle and high school. So it's important for us to be able to diagnose those problems for students and be able to address those problems so that they can better access that grade level content. So it's just important to see this representation, to see all of these strands, all these green ones, all these blue ones are necessary for the student to have the ability to fully comprehend what they're reading. So if there's weaknesses in any of them, that's how a rope works. If one strand is kind of weakened or frayed, the rest of the rope kind of loses some of its integrity too. So we want to keep that in mind as we're moving through this course. And it just bumped me out of where I was. Let me get back to it. I guess when you open the pictures, it moves your slide. So I want to just make sure that we are aware that just because this is where our HQIM and where our instruction typically lives does not mean that we may not have to address some of the challenges students have in word recognition. And that's where some of these assessments and these programs that we're going to talk about are going to come in. All students in all of your grade levels and all of your content areas should be getting really good instruction in their grade level content that's focused on those language comprehension strategies, regardless of their reading ability. The intervention and the support for the struggling readers might require you to have support in any one of those strands. So let's go ahead and let me make sure I didn't miss anything on this slide. I think I kind of covered most of it, but the main point, though, this is something I really want to drive home, and you'll hear me say this a bunch in the presentation too. When you identify the students who need support and what their specific skills are that they need support in, it is incredibly important that their intervention or support plan is incredibly targeted to what they need, that they have very direct and explicit instruction, and that it is scaffolded appropriately for their level, and that you are progress monitoring them throughout the process to make sure that what you are doing with them is actually working, is effective, or if it needs to be adjusted. We will talk a good bit about progress monitoring. We have a whole session actually dedicated to progress monitoring. Today, we won't go super in depth on it, but it is something that we want to make sure we make mention of because it should be part of the process as well. And we talked about on the common language slide, the oral reading fluency probe. That's important because you need to understand fluency and its role in reading comprehension to really understand some of the purposes of these interventions we'll be doing. So fluency, you might have noticed, was not necessarily on that reading rope. But that's because fluency, I want you to think of it as like a bridge between word recognition and language comprehension. So fluency means we're reading the text with accuracy, prosody, and automaticity without spending a great deal of our cognitive energy trying to just figure out what a word is on the page. So students that are not very fluent readers, they may read slowly, they may read really choppily. They're spending a lot of their time when they're trying to read just trying to figure out what a word says, and they're not able to spend as much of their energy on trying to figure out what the words on the page mean. So that's why fluency is so important to comprehension, because if you have a student who is already struggling to just decode the words on the page, they are likely not going to be able to comprehend a whole lot of meaning from that page. So fluency is the bridge. If they can decode well, that gives them one step of the process, and they can read fluently. It gives them a little bit more of an ability to comprehend what they're reading off the page. But that's why we test oral reading fluency, because it helps to give us like an idea of who actually needs to be further screened as we go through the process. This is the simple view of reading on your screen right here. Typically, you'll see it as a multiplication problem where it just has word recognition times language comprehension equals reading comprehension. I had found this image that actually breaks it down a little further to show you how fluency is the bridge here. And word recognition and language comprehension, those you can pull from Scarborough's reading. Word recognition still encompasses phonemic awareness and phonics, things like that. And then language comprehension would still kind of encompass most of those things on the upper part of the rope. And the reason why it's presented as a multiplication problem, and I know a lot of us on here are probably English teachers, so please bear with me because I'm also an English teacher, not a math person, but think of it as each of those components, word recognition and language comprehension, as equaling the number one. 1 times 1 equals 1, which would equal our reading comprehension. If you have students who have significant gaps in one of those particular components, let's say in word recognition, you have a student with significant gaps, so they don't have 1 right here. Let's say they have 0 or even 0.25 times 1. That will not equal 1. That will not equal reading comprehension. So your students, their reading comprehension will suffer, basically, if they do not have a full and complete grasp of those two components of the simple view of reading. So that's why it's shown like represented as a multiplication problem, to show you that it is important that they are able to do both of those components and do them well to really be able to access their grade level content and to be able to comprehend what they're reading. So, and I mentioned this earlier, and I'm going to mention this a lot too in this presentation, but targeted interventions are the absolute key to this. The students need to have very highly specific support that is determined based on the assessment data. And again, we're going to go over the assessments that we'll be using in a few minutes. The intervention needs to be really targeted towards specific skills that are preventing a student from accessing grade level content, to make sure that they are having the fastest rate of growth possible towards benchmark. If students are not given tailored interventions, what ends up happening is you have the risk of your teachers and your students kind of wasting some of their time and resources, maybe doing something the student doesn't have a deficit in, or where they could have been focused on something that the student has a much greater need, and it's wasting time that they could be progressing and moving closer and closer towards proficiency. So it's really important that you are able to identify specific skills for students and then give them that specific support when they need it. Campus-wide intervention plans really should include protocols, again, for that progress monitoring once you have identified the students and their needs, to ensure they're making that adequate movement towards their goals. And again, that will be covered a little bit more in depth later on. But what we're going to talk about today, in addition to those assessments, is the multi-tiered systems of support. I'm going to introduce the tiers kind of today. And then as we move through the next 3 sessions after today, we will go more in depth of each of them and what they all look like and what they entail. So tier 1 is something that every student will actually receive support on your campus, whether they are the best reader on your campus or the most struggling reader on your campus. Everybody will receive support in tier 1. This is just good core instruction that is being delivered by a highly effective teacher using HQIM. We have research that indicates that if you have really good, healthy core instruction, you should see within a cohort about 80% mastery of your students just through their core instruction alone. So if that's not the case on your sites right now, if you're not seeing 80% mastery rates with just core instruction alone, it is really recommended that you make it a priority to strengthen your core instruction before you focus on really anything else. Because we talked about earlier about how this is a proactive process more so than a reactive process. If students are getting that really healthy core instruction, you're going to probably eliminate some of those students who you think might need more intensive intervention because they're getting that high quality core instruction. So really keep that in mind as you're moving forward. If you have lower than 80% mastery rates right now, you really want to take a hard look at how your HQIM is being delivered, if there's some opportunities for some more development amongst your teachers to really get that strengthened to the best that it can be. Students who are not progressing in core instruction already, after let's say I know I have good core instruction going on right now, but I still have a pocket of students that are just not quite progressing as they should be. Those are the students that we may need to have some supplemental support or intensive intervention with to kind of close some of those gaps they may have come to us with to help them access the grade level content. So this targeted intervention should be matched to the student needs based on performance on a diagnostic assessment, and their rate of growth needs to be shown with the identified skill as well. With those target interventions, you want to make sure that they are receiving direct and explicit instruction on the skills and they are being progress monitored. They also need to make sure that those progress monitoring assessments are being regularly performed at regular intervals. We'll talk about what that looks like for different tiers in a little bit, to ensure the effectiveness of support and track the rate of growth for students, and to make instructional decisions to decide maybe this student needs an extra day of support or more time or things like that. And again, we can talk about those variables when we get to that component of the course. So this is going to be your first opportunity to be in breakout rooms in just a moment. You on your screen, you should have, if you're following along on your professional learning platform, you should have gotten to like a little matching activity. All you'll do is if you see these little dots right here, you can click them and then you'll be able to drag over to whichever of the terms on the other side you want to match it with, or you could do it from this side as well, either side, but you're going to match them. I'm going to put you in breakout rooms though for about 5 minutes so you guys can talk with each other. This is just really kind of a check for understanding for the content that we've covered so far. So just give me a moment to get the breakout room started. You'll have about 5 minutes to work in there. You can talk with each other, and then each individual person will need to actually do this themselves after you've talked with each other, but you can work on it together. So give me one second.
Can I tell them one thing?
Yeah, go ahead.
Feel free, guys, too, if you're in the can. I know not everybody's in, but it sounds like most people are in the canopy course. Feel free to go back through the information above. So if you know the answer, feel free to match. But you can definitely go back through. That's the beauty of this presentation style type. You can go back and review any of the things that she's asking you to match in a second.
Yep. Okay, so I think there's about 40 people on here. So I'm gonna do, I think 9 breakout rooms. I think that's good, Natalie. I think 9 will work. It should just automatically put you in one so you can go ahead and join it. And we'll try to float around to as many of them as possible in the next 5 minutes in case you guys need us. All right, they are open. And then Wendy and Natalie, y'all can kind of just pick one to hop into. I didn't start a timer.
It looks like most people joined. I'm going to pop into some.
Okay.
Um, and if they have 5 minutes, you can broadcast. So just tell them when they have 1 minute left. It's fine.
Okay, that's what I'm gonna do. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Room 2 only has 2 people that joined so far. If one of y'all wants to pop in there.
Okay, that's where I'll go.
And room 8 or 9 also.
That.
Hey
Right.
guys, I'm just wanting to make sure y'all are able to access everything.
No, I'm not. I don't have access to Canopy. I did email my district to hopefully get, I mean, I logged into Canopy,
Sure.
um, but like there's nothing that's there. So I'm not sure what's going on. Like it wouldn't allow me to use the access code that y'all gave me.
Okay.
So I'm not sure
Yeah, that's
what's
okay,
happening.
Megan. I want to make sure, are you able to at least see the left-hand column where it says join course, or you don't even see that part?
No, I didn't see that part on mine. Hold on,
Mhm.
let me open up that
I'm going to share
browser.
my screen just in case to help you walk through. I don't know if I can help, but I'm going to try to. Um, so over here, when you log in, you should see like this kind of column on the side, and there should be a plus sign that says join course. Do you see that at all when you log in?
No, ma'am.
Okay,
Mm-mm.
yeah. So we'll have to troubleshoot and get you some help. In the meantime, Richard, are you able to log into Canopy?
Yes. I'm able to log in.
Okay. I'm gonna stop sharing. I don't know if are you able to share screen in here, Richard?
Uh, Let me see if I'm.
If not, I can share and we can just work through it.
Um,
I don't know if it would let you.
I don't see anything.
Okay. All right. Then I'll just share. We can talk through it if y'all are okay with that.
Well, it says
Yes.
host disabled participant screen sharing.
Let's see if it'll let me do that. Okay. Try now.
I don't. Now it's. Let me see.
Just make sure we're all on mute again before we get started. It looks like pretty much everybody's back. All right. So, hopefully it was able to, you were able to do this without any issues. It should have given you a second attempt if for some reason you got something wrong the first time that you submitted on the professional learning platform. But just so we can all look at this quickly and make sure we all kind of had the same answers, you should have matched fluency with reading text with accuracy, prosody, and automaticity. The oral reading fluency probe is used to assess a student's fluency and allows the teacher to see the accuracy and rate a student possesses when reading text. This refers to how many words correct per minute. And then WCPM is the acronym for words correct per minute. Intervention should, and I don't know why the dot 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 is backwards like that. Sorry about that. That's just how the platform did it. Be specifically targeted to individual skills where there are weaknesses through systematic, explicit, and direct instruction. A universal screener is also something that all students take to assess their risk of reading difficulties. Diagnostic would be an assessment used to diagnose the exact skills a student needs support with. And then the reading rope is a visual representation of all the components a person needs to be a skilled reader. And then lastly, targeted intervention should be support matched to a student's need based on assessment data. So hopefully you guys were able to get those with the help of your groups and whatnot, but that was just kind of a checkpoint to see where we're at. Before we keep going, does anybody have any questions that they need clarified about the information we've covered so far? And if you do have questions throughout and you're not comfortable coming off of mute, you can always drop them in the chat too, and one of us will be able to address it.
Haley, just logistically, I made it to where participants can share screen. So if you're in the breakout rooms and somebody in your breakout room doesn't have access to Canopy and you still want to participate where you can both see the screen, me and my little group did that. So you're welcome to do that. After the call ends and we're finished, if you're in Canopy already and you need some help walking around the platform, I'm happy to help. But I just want to make sure that everybody at this point just has at least what you need to engage in today's session. So let us know in the chat if you don't.
Thank you. I didn't realize I could do that for people in the breakout rooms. Thank you so much. Any questions otherwise before we move on? Okay. Okay, so we've got kind of the context and the foundational stuff not out of the way, but we've covered it. So let's start talking about the actual assessments that we want to use to start identifying students who may need some further support. They're having reading challenges. So you shouldn't be placing students in intervention unless you have done appropriate assessments with them and have that appropriate data that indicates they have very specific needs and they have reading challenges, or that they're having issues accessing that grade level content. So those assessments are your universal literacy screener, diagnostic assessments, and then you can use other data points like formative and summative data that you might have from LEAP scores or historical grades and GPA, some curriculum embedded assessments, and you can also look at teacher input as well. You just want to make sure that you're also using an actual diagnostic to inform the decisions about what kind of instruction the student will get once they are placed into an intervention program. So those are all things you can use. We're going to talk a lot more specifically about just the universal screener and the diagnostic assessment today, but just know that you have other data points that you can look at as well to help kind of inform your decision of even just who to screen and who to give the diagnostic assessments to. So any students with potential reading challenges should be assessed with that universal literacy screener at the beginning of the school year, like very, very early in the school year. That way, once you get the results from the universal literacy screener, you'll see which students are considered potentially having difficulties accessing grade level text and then or grade level content. And then with those students, you'll know you may need to do further diagnostic assessments with to see what specifically they may be struggling with. That process needs to be kind of scheduled out before your school year ever even begins so that you know, like, in the second and third week of the school year, I'm pulling my students that need a universal screener done. We're doing that, and then we're analyzing that information, and we're doing the diagnostic in week 4 or whatever it is that makes sense for your campus. But that should be predetermined before the kids even step onto campus for the first day of school. But you need to make sure that plan accounts for universal literacy screener, diagnostic assessment, analyzing the data you get from those assessments, and then making any instructional decisions from there. And you want to make sure that the people involved in this process are well trained in any of the programs that you may end up using. That way it's as smooth as possible. And you also want to plan for how you're going to communicate this information with your students and your parents as well. So what this course is also built off of is Joan Sedita has done a lot of research in secondary literacy, and she kind of has a blueprint or a framework of how the process should look on secondary campuses. So you'll see that there's this flow chart for literacy assessment plans in grades 4 through 12. This is the general flow of what you would want to follow when you're trying to determine which students need intervention and what interventions those students need. When I show you the program that we are going to look at today, LIFT, you'll notice that there's a flow chart in LIFT that looks very similar to this flow chart because it is backed by this research. But this is more of like a roadmap basically for what you can do. So this particular flowchart does not have a specific program or a specific test that it's asking you to use. It's just giving you the general guidelines of what you should go through for the process. So some of your districts already have access to paid programs that will provide the materials that are referenced in this flowchart, but some of your districts do not have paid programs. So we're going to talk about the free options that you can use today. But if you are interested in seeing what the approved tier 1 intervention programs are that you could possibly have, there is a link in here that it just says access here. You click that, you can look at that at your own leisure. If somebody wants to drop that one in the chat for me, that's an option for you to look at if you are interested in purchasing a program. However, today we aren't going to look at any of those. We're going to look at Lyft, and we're going to kind of look at Dibbles a little bit too. So those are your two free ones, Dibbles and Lyft. Lyft has been developed by the department, and Dibbles is another free tool that you can use as well. I have them linked on here, but we're going to go more in depth in them in a couple of slides. So if you don't want to click on them yet, you don't have to, but we will be going to Lyft first. So this flowchart indicates that where you start is giving a group administered reading comprehension screener or literacy screener to, this says all your students. For some of you, that may not be a possibility, that may not be logistically possible. So we recommend that you maybe start with your students who are scoring at basic and below on their LEAP test and give them that universal screener. Again, you can look at other information besides LEAP. You can look at how they've been performing historically in ELA and in reading. You can also talk with their teachers and look at some of their summative and formative assessments outside of LEAP, but you can start with looking at your LEAP data, and anyone who is basic, approaching basic, or unsat is where we would recommend that you start with that universal screener. Then you'll notice that if they score at grade level, then if they score at grade level or above grade level, they should just be able to continue to receive support in their core instruction. But students who are like right at that threshold of grade level and below need to move on to step 2, which is where we would assess their oral reading fluency, which is a diagnostic. And then the students who are scoring above benchmark there, they can continue on with their core instruction. They may need some supplemental support and maybe one of those language comprehension strands, like maybe background knowledge or vocabulary, but those are things that can be supported either through core instruction or through some supplemental time that's not quite as intensive. If you have students that are scoring at or below on the fluency oral reading fluency probe, then you're going to want to move them on to something we call a code knowledge inventory or a phonics assessment, because those students may have significant foundational challenges in their ability to access the grade level content. So that's when they would go and take another assessment, another diagnostic, which I'll show you what that looks like in Lyft in a couple of moments. And if they are scoring poorly on there, it should be able to give you some categories of specific skills that they are struggling with, that you can start to develop a plan for instruction and support for those kids based on those skills. And it goes on from there. So that's the general guidelines there. You'll notice that Lyft follows this exactly, and your programs that you are using that are paid programs on the approved list will generally follow this as well. This is the flow chart that's actually in Lyft. So I don't want to make it bigger because it's going to take me off of my slide, but if you guys go to the administration materials, which is on this link, and if my co-host, one of you could drop that link into the chat for anybody who does not have access to this, we are going to go and look at this in a moment. So have a tab open with the administration materials, please. And I'm going to let mine load. I'm going to kind of walk you through what information is in Lyft and kind of the process that you would go through using those materials specifically. But you'll notice that it does follow that roadmap we just looked at. So let's go into this is what it looks like. Am I sharing the screen? Yeah. Okay. So this is what the administration materials looks like. It's called the Literacy Interventions and Foundational Toolkit. On this first page is some front matter that kind of explains why things need to be done and who needs to receive some of these assessments. So I highly recommend that you do take a moment to read through this if you were to use this program. It even notes in here that not all students need all parts of this assessment. Some students, you'll give them the oral reading fluency probe and you'll see that they don't need the code knowledge because they're not showing a significant difficulty where they're unable to read. But you need to read through this before you do anything with the program. I'm not going to read this to you guys right now, but it is important that you look at it. It's for grades 3 and up. It's not necessarily a substitute for a universal screener. It's a diagnostic assessment that you want to use after you've done a screener. You'll also notice on this first page, there is a link to a student recording packet, which you can open right now. You'll need one of these for each student that you're planning to assess. And you'll see you can write their name on there and everything, and you'll be able to record all of their results on this student profile at a glance. So you'll have pretty much all the information that you can gather from this assessment all in one little sheet that you can refer back to. You'll notice that this also has a bunch of other embedded links in it. So it's got a words correct per minute calculator in here that you can click on it. It'll bring you to actually an Excel sheet that is already got the formula in it for you to put in. I'll show you what that looks like after it loads, but we'll come back to that. It's got a fluency norms chart in there, so you kind of know what student percentiles they're trying to achieve, things like that. And then if they need to go beyond the oral reading fluency probe, there's spots for you to record how they do on the code knowledge inventory as well. So we'll look at that a little bit more in depth. There's some more explanations and things throughout here for you to look at, and some other things you can click on to get to the instructional activities that are provided. But if we go back to the administration manual, or the administration packet, there we go. Okay. The very third page is that flow chart that we have in here. So you'll always, if you have this packet, you'll always have access to this flow chart to be able to follow through the process of what you need to do if a student is scoring at benchmark or is scoring above or is scoring below. You can just follow the progression through here. And then there is on the next page, this starting point, again, something that's very important for anyone who's going to be administering this test to make sure that you read through. It links the student recording packet again on this page. And it also goes through the words correct per minute calculations at the bottom, but you can use the spreadsheet that's linked in there that has the formula already preloaded. So just to kind of show you what's in here, there is a passage called Quest for the Best. This is the oral reading fluency passage that we have in here that the students would read out loud to you for 1 minute, and you would record mistakes that they make and then calculate their words correct per minute. We'll go into how to do that in a little bit. There's a second one in here in case it is needed, but really you should just need the Quest for the Best one. And then after that, there's information on what to do if a student is not scoring above benchmark on the oral reading fluency probe. This is the code knowledge inventory. It talks about what this assesses. So the different components of like phonemic awareness and phonics. It talks about what to do or who needs this assessment. It's what's in there. It's a 3-part inventory. And then you'll see a bunch of charts that look like this. This is where students would just go through and read these words across, and then you would make note of any mistakes they made. And that way you can see like up here on the student information packet, which let me go back to that real quick. It's up here. Should have left that open for you. On their profile at a glance, if they're doing the code inventory knowledge, if there's 20 CVC words on that code inventory. If they make 7 mistakes, then you would put they got 13 out of 20 here and go through and for each of them, however many they got correct out of the number. And you can kind of see where they have weaknesses and which areas they might need more support in. And then you can click on any of these and it'll bring you to instructional activities to help support them. Okay. But you see that it follows this framework that we've looked at before. And I have it all written out here as well on Canopy. But if a student is scoring, it's important to know if they're scoring at that 50th percentile, you may want to continue their assessment just to make sure that there aren't any foundational gaps in their knowledge. While 50th is technically at benchmark, if they're right on the cusp, you may want to just further test them to see if there's some further support that is needed. But LIFT is just one of the type of diagnostics that you can use for the purpose of diagnosing those specific abilities. Both LIFT and DIBELS are free resources that you can use for screening oral reading fluency. It's just up to your side to decide which one of those you want to use if you're looking for a free option. LIFT does provide the diagnostic assessments, though, after the universal screening to determine specific skills to target the intervention, as well as some activities that you can use. It's not an all-inclusive list of every activity you could use to support a kid, but it does give you at least some starting points of where you can go with your instruction. So let's head on over to this next thing. Oh, so I'm not going to put you in breakout rooms for this. This is just going to be something you're going to do on your own it's only 2 questions, 2 little multiple choice questions, just kind of to check understanding. True or false, if a student scores above the 50th percentile on the oral reading fluency probe, that means that they do not need any form of support in their core instruction. And then number 2, what is the appropriate next step for a student who is performing well below grade level on a universal screener? And you can go back through you can look at the flow chart and everything as well, but I'm gonna give you about 2 minutes to go ahead and answer these just individually. About 1 more minute. Okay, so let's go ahead and review these. True or false, if a student scores above the 50th percentile on an oral reading fluency probe, they will not need any form of support beyond their core instruction. Technically, that is not true. They may have some difficulties with some of those upper strands of the reading rope that are not showing up in the oral reading fluency probe that they may need some supplemental support in. So you may have students that don't, but you may also have some that do. And then for what is appropriate for next steps for a student who's performing well below grade level on a universal screener, that student needs to take a diagnostic and find out what specifically they are struggling with to give them some targeted intervention. So that would be letter C, administer a fluency assessment to aid in diagnosing specific skills the student is struggling with. Does anybody have any questions about that before we move on? Or do Wendy or Natalie, if you have anything you want to add to this before I move on, feel free also. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about that identification process and determining those needs for intervention and really kind of get introduced to the idea of that multi-tiered system of support that we've been talking about. So once you've administered all those appropriate assessments for those students, it's time for you to identify which students need which types of intervention. So you've done the actual assessment part. Now you need to analyze your data and you need to figure out, what do I do with this information instructionally? So this is where it's really helpful to have that tiered system of, it just makes the process really simple for you to follow, and it makes it really easy to kind of cater all of your instruction for your individual students and all their diverse needs. So tier 1 students, as we've talked about, is something that every student, no matter how they perform on any of these assessments, is going to be getting supported. They all should be getting high quality core instruction. But tier 1 students that are only receiving tier 1 support are the ones that are performing above grade level on your universal literacy screener and diagnostics. But they should be also, all of your students should be getting that support. Students with reading struggles may need some other support, and that is where the other tiers come in. So if you want to think about tier 1 in secondary settings, we can think about it as content literacy. It's instruction for all students that addresses background knowledge, content vocabulary, comprehension strategies, goals for reading, and the reading-writing connection, using those classroom materials taught by a content area teacher in those classrooms. This is where you should only be providing grade level materials in tier 1 instruction. You should not be going below grade level when you're doing your tier 1 instruction with your students. This is where they should all be having that access to grade level content. Then you may have some students, a smaller pocket of students that need a little bit more support. They're maybe roughly a grade level behind. They're a little bit weak with their reading, and they need some help with some of those skills to help access their grade level content. So it can be stuff that has to do with general vocabulary growth, some additional practice in reading comprehension strategies, some advanced word study, like with morphology, to help them access that vocabulary. They may need some fluency support with some supplemental materials. And this can be taught by ELA teachers or trained specialists in extra literacy classes or extended ELA blocks. So one thing I want to kind of already start pulling out for you is that tier 2 and tier 3, which we're going to talk about in a moment, should not be happening during their core instruction. You should not be pulling students out of their core instruction to provide them with any kind of supplemental or intensive intervention. They are entitled to that full core access to grade level text. And then if they need further support, they need to get that outside of their ELA block. In tier 3, this is our more intensive intervention. So this is going to be an even smaller percentage of your students, excuse me. And it's for students who are struggling significantly with being able to read and access grade level content. So they may have a lot more of those word recognition and foundational struggles with reading in their decoding, their spelling, and their language structures. They also are probably going to need some help with vocabulary growth and some additional comprehension strategies. And this is going to be using intervention materials taught by a trained specialist or in very small group or individual settings outside of their ELA block. You might have noticed that I said at the end of tier 3, it said using intervention materials. And then in the tier 2, I said using supplemental materials. Just know that in tier 2, you could be using materials from your HQIM just with further supports for your students, because that's where you're really trying to help them just kind of bridge those small gaps to be able to be successful in their core block and to access that grade level content. Whereas the tier 3 students who are needing that kind of support, they may need to have some more intensive materials about like decoding and phonemic awareness and phonics and things like that. And that's why it needs to be a little bit more smaller groups or even individual settings for those students. To further kind of illustrate this,
Haley, can I back up for just a second?
yes, you can.
The tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3, guys. So your tier 1 is your core curriculum. And some of the assessments that Haley went over, I just want to reiterate what they are because she showed you them, but I want to just take you back through the order one more time since you saw the flow chart. In core, if students are not being successful with core curriculum, or if a student scored unsat or approaching basic and you have cause for concern and you want more information, you're going to assign a universal screener. Dibbles was that universal screener that Haley gave you as an example. It's free to use. It goes from kindergarten to 8th grade, and I suggest using the 8th grade materials for 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th. Okay, so they're very easy. There's an administration manual in Dibbles as well. It's very easy to interpret. They also have an oral reading fluency probe, which is what you'll get in Dibbles in the lift materials that Haley shared with you as well. So once you administer the oral reading fluency probe, and these directions are in lift as well as in Dibbles, if they score below the 50th percentile, there's cause for concern, and then you have to find more information. What Haley showed you with the foundational code diagnostic is where you're diagnosing to see what other causes for concern there are. So the lift materials really take you through to determine where are the gaps happening so that you can offer very targeted intervention support. And if somebody has in high school, if somebody has a need for foundational code, it's probably going to fall in that tier 3 intensive intervention.
Yeah.
Somebody who's fully trained on how to administer them. If you have questions at any point in the presentation, please stop us, because we know that some people, it sounded like in the beginning survey, were very comfortable with this, but we also recognize there's a lot that really don't. And so we want to meet you where you are. Thanks, Haley.
And I know, yeah, thank you. And some of that I am going to cover in a moment too. And I know I'm going fast. We are in a time constraint, so I'm trying to make sure we get everything in. So please tell me if you need me to go back and look at anything. I did pull up this because for some reason my graphic is getting cut off on the Canopy screen of this top graphic. But this is just to kind of further illustrate where students may need support and what those different tiers mean. So again, you give that literacy assessment to all your students. The students that need diagnostic assessments are generally going to be the ones that are your weaker readers or struggling readers. Those are the students that may need that tier 2 supplemental support or tier 3 intervention programs like Natalie was just talking about. Your stronger readers typically will just be the ones that only need that tier 1 support. They just need that really strong core instruction. But notice that all three, the good reader, weak reader, and struggling readers, all have an arrow pointing to that tier 1. So I want to drive that home again, that it is so important that no matter which support level that these students are at, they're still getting that high quality core instruction. And then from there, we can give them further support depending on their needs based on those diagnostic assessments. And I have another, I have this already. I just read this to you guys, this bottom graphic, but it just kind of further defines what those different levels of support are. So content literacy or tier 1 should be your grade level content, your high quality instructional materials, your core instruction. Tier 2 is your supplemental support for your students that just need a little extra help outside of the core block. And you can use your high quality instructional materials there and just maybe do further direct and explicit instruction or provide them with more opportunities for practice and feedback, or whatever is appropriate for those students. And then your struggling readers that have that really strong deficit in code knowledge, that are really struggling to actually read, they are the ones that need that more intervention program, small group, individual, intensive instruction. again, outside of their core instruction. So let me go back to my course. And then just kind of like from a global perspective, when we're talking about, I want to tie this back to the NTSS model that we're talking about. This is generally how it should look for most campuses if you have healthy core instruction. About 80 to 85% of your students should be getting enough support through just tier one. And then you'll have about 10 to 15 of them that may need some of that targeted small group and supplemental instruction in tier two. And then a very small group of them, roughly 5% of them, may need that individual intensive support in tier three. So just to give you an idea of what this should look like. And again, like I said at the beginning, if you know that you have significantly lower than 80% mastery right now on your campus, you might want to first focus on really strengthening that core instruction as a priority to try to eliminate some of the need for students to be in that tier two level of support. All right. Oh, the scroll bar's down here. That's why it's cut off. Sorry, y'all. All right. So the tiers of support and the process have been identified for the students that have been addressed. Let's discuss some of the more logistical aspects of how do you know who to screen? What do you do after we screen? We talked about this a little bit already, but I want to review it. So again, for my secondary settings, if you can screen all of your students and you want to at the beginning of the year, then you can to see who is at risk for reading difficulties. But if that is not a logistic possibility, then I suggest that you start looking at your LEAP data and you pull the students who are scoring basic and below on the most recent ELA LEAP assessment that they took. And then those students will get that screener, and the screener will tell you, yes, the student is at risk for reading difficulties, or no, they are not. They're at grade level or they above. If they are at risk, then you want to move forward with giving them that diagnostic assessment, which would be the oral reading fluency probe, like we just looked at, the quest for the best. The oral reading fluency probes are very easy to administer. They're very short. And you can actually administer them to several students just within like a 30-minute time block. They're only 1 minute long per student. So you have the student read like quest for the best, the passage that we had. I can pull it back up for you guys even. Tell them you're going to set a timer for 1 minute. You just want them to read as much as they can within that 1 minute. You're going to follow along with them as they read. And let me pull up to here it is, quest for the best. You start your timer, tell them to begin. They will start reading. You'll have a copy of it in front of you in their student recording packet. And anytime that they skip a word, read a word incorrectly, change a word or something like that, you'll mark it on your page. And then when the time is up, you just tell them to stop wherever they are in the passage. They don't have to finish the passage. Make sure they know that. And then from there, you would calculate how many mistakes they made. And you can input that into the formula based off of how many words they actually read in that minute and how many they read correctly, where's my formula? Here it is. So total number of words read, just don't even worry about them. Let's say they got to 170 words, minus how many errors they made. Maybe they made 20 errors. So they made 150 words correct in that minute. So it's a very simple formula. You don't really need the spreadsheet, but just in case you wanted to see what it looks like, I will show you. Let me share this screen instead. So let's say again, they read 170 words correct. Not correct, I'm sorry, 170 words total. So I put 170 in and they made 20 errors. And then we want to put it in seconds. We gave them 60 seconds. And then it'll tell us that they read 150 words correct per minute, which means that their accuracy rating was 88%. So that means on the student recording packet, let me go back to that screen. Which this is the administration manual. I need to go back to the student recording packet real quick for you guys. Okay, so on that student profile up here, you would fill out the student's information and then circle quest for the best. I got 150 words correct per minute for this student, and their accuracy rating was 88% according to that Excel spreadsheet. I'd put that information in. From there, if a student's accuracy is 95% or greater, you would go to the fluency norms chart to identify their reading percentile. It is linked here. I also do have it in this course. I think it's on this next screen. No, it's not. So I'll just go to the link, but it's in here. But you go to the fluency norm chart. And it'll tell you based on what time of the year it is. If you're talking about beginning of the year, you'll look at fall by grade level, what the 50th percentile is for that grade level. So this one only has through sixth in that link on the lift thing, but the one that I have in the course goes through eighth grade. And like Natalie said, if you have ninth through 12th grade students, use the eighth grade information, because that is roughly the rate of speech, and that's generally where we want students to be able to read when they are doing their oral reading fluency probes.
Yeah, you're going
So
to
you
see that
can,
it actually tops out, guys, in about sixth grade. There's only two more
yeah.
words correct per minute by eighth. And that's really because, like Haley said, we don't want students reading faster than the rate of speech, because then we are impacting comprehension there as well if they're reading too fast.
And then you can also go through and determine how expressively they read on here as well. The less fluent they are, most likely the less expressive they will be with their reading, and so on and so forth. But you would identify their percentile and put it in on this little spot right here. And then it tells you, oh, I just clicked this link and I didn't mean to. It's going to load. There we go. Go back to where I was.
And it gives you a key, guys, where Haley was just now, that says that they have to read at the 50th percentile and at least 95% accuracy.
Yeah, that's why up here it has it too. If their accuracy, if any student who reads with less than 95% accuracy or is below the 50th percentile for their words correct per minute, that's when you know you need to go to the code knowledge. So that would be the next part of the, where it had like the words like bat, cat, and all that on the screen. And I showed you earlier, you'd have that one you don't need to time the students for. You can just ask them to read it. And then you would just keep track of how many words they read correctly off of each of those different categories and mark it on this sheet. And if you notice that they have significantly low numbers of correct ones on some of these, you can go like maybe to R control vowels. Maybe they only got 2 right. Then that, you know, that's a challenge for them. That might be something they need support in. When you click on it, it will bring you to the Lift landing page here, which, by the way, I'm going to show you all this earlier. This is also where you can access the administration manual and the student recording packet as well. So you'll have, it's on the LDOE website. But if you go to activities and resources, it's got all of the different categories. So like R control vowel cards, you can go there. And then it will pull up some instructional activities and resources that you can use for those students. Natalie, does it have the directions on that one? Or
So the one you clicked on is just resources. If we go to phonics, a little bit under that.
oh yeah, that's right. Okay. That's right. Okay.
They changed
So,
the
like,
website. Everybody's trying to figure out the new
I know
website.
this is new, sorry. So, or let's say they were having CBC issues. If we click on that one, just to show you what it looks like, it will come up as a download. And you'll open it, it'll come up as a think, is it PowerPoints or it's PowerPoints? Okay. I just want to show you what one looks like. So give me a second. My PowerPoint is loading. All right. And it'll look like this. Not like this. It'll actually be white. I don't know why my screen's not loading correctly, but it'll give you a rationale for the specific activity that they're doing. It's a decoding CVC words and isolation activity. It even tells you what part of the reading rope it would be a part of. So word recognition, decoding, gives you some rationale behind why this is something that you would want to do with your students, the materials that you need, and then a step-by-step process of how to actually do the activity with your students that need it. And then this particular activity also has a recording sheet that you can use in conjunction with the instructional materials. And they have that for all of the different activities that are on there for the different categories in Lift. Natalie, is there anything else you wanted to say about that?
No, and we know, like we said, Haley's kind of flying through because we have an hour and a half with you. I did put in the chat, guys, links to the literacy library, the professional growth tab. There is a video on how to administer every part that Haley's showing you. So it takes you step by step on how to do that. That's in the chat. I can post that again, just to kind of break down how to administer everything from the code knowledge, excuse me, inventory, all the way to the phonemic awareness inventory. We know this is really different work for you. If you need assistance beyond, because Haley's going to go in sessions 2 and 3 into some more depth on some of these things. But if you have any questions along the way, the whole team is very responsive. It can definitely help answer any of those questions, even beyond today.
And you can email us at louisianaliteracy@la.gov whenever you need to. We check it frequently. I do want to make one little mention here about when if you're looking at, like, if your school has purchased programs, or if you end up purchasing a program for your intensive intervention, number one, you don't need to administer Lift or Dibbles if you have one of those paid programs, because it'll have the screener, it'll have the diagnostic in there. But if you're using one of those programs, just know that nothing will replace the instruction of a highly effective teacher or a highly effective reading interventionist. So it is highly, highly recommended that if you are using one of these paid programs, that the teachers and any of the personnel involved with using it for instruction with your students is very well trained in that program and able to provide that face-to-face component with your students as well, using the materials within that program. So it's much better for student outcomes if you have a teacher working with the students rather than maybe just having them sit on the program if it's at all possible. So we want to make sure that teachers are very well trained in any program that you do choose to use, if you choose to use one of those paid programs that's on that list of approved ones. If a student is using a tier 1 intervention program and they're not quickly progressing out of intervention, that might mean, it might indicate to you that it's time to consider that there may be some issues with how the program is being implemented. So that might mean that there may be a need for further training for your teachers in that particular aspect. But I just wanted to make sure that you're aware that like the program is not the end all be all fix all for your students. You still have to make sure that your teachers understand how the program works so they can actually deliver really high quality instruction through the program and through the materials in the program to your students. And we kind of went over that stuff already. So for time's sake, I'm going to ask that you guys, this is a little 5-minute video by Dr. Stephanie Stolar. She goes through 3 different scenarios of different students after they've taken their screener and their diagnostic, and kind of like thinks through like what would be the next steps for each of these students. It has 2 embedded questions in it. So when you do watch it, they'll pop up when it's time for you to answer that question. So I'll be able to see what your answers are to it and kind of see if that's something I need to address in the next session further or not. But because we only have about 20 minutes left, I'm going to go ahead and have you guys just watch this later on your own. But I really, really highly encourage you to go back and watch this because I think it's good to hear her thought process as she goes through it. I will say she does reference one specific program at one point in her video, but just know that the process that she uses, her thought process, applies to every single type of program you would use when you're trying to make decisions about what tier of support or what the next steps are for a student. Okay. And this does bring you through the actual landing page on the website. I just kind of walked you through it, so I don't want to spend a lot of time on here, but you saw it looks like this. You've got the diagnostic tools tab where you can pull up all the information for the administration packet and the student recording packet. This orange one is actually the recording of how to go through and use everything in the LIFT kit. And then you've got all the links to your different types of resources and instructional activities on here as well. So that's living on the LDOE website. There's over 70 different interventions that you can use that are currently available on that website. Just so you know, there's a good bit in there. All right, and we walked through the administration packet already, so obviously I got ahead of myself earlier when we were going through it. But does anybody have questions about any of that at the moment? Because this slide was meant for me to walk you through the packet, which I've done already. So if you have questions about that, now would probably be a good time to ask.
Just general takeaways, guys, before we go to the next activity. A general takeaway we want you to have is that when you start with an oral reading fluency probe and you've given it, and if a student is below the 50th percentile, you need more information through a diagnostic. That needs to be a general takeaway to engage in the next level of activity. Typically, the diagnostic is going to be some kind of either code knowledge inventory, or it could even be there's other kinds of diagnostics we'll share with you guys towards the end. There's even you could diagnose vocabulary, you could diagnose anything. It's like going to a doctor after you know you're sick and you're actually physically figuring out what's wrong based on the symptoms. Is really what a diagnostic tells you. It tells you go into this group to work on this kind of activity. This is where the deficit is. LIFT is one kind of thing that does that.
Yeah. And then I believe, this is the norms I was talking about. I have this graphic in here that you can refer back to whenever. This is also linked into the LIFT administration packet. But this goes through 8th grade. It tells you what the 50th percentile is for each of these grade levels at fall, winter, and spring. Okay, so let's look at an example of what a filled out student profile might look like and what it means for this particular student's needs. So this student, P. Smith, is a 7th grade student. And let's say we tested this child in September of 23. And they did Quest for the Best. And she got 122 words correct per minute, which puts her at the 96% for accuracy. And it says right here, if the student's accuracy is 95% or greater, use the fluency norm chart to identify their reading percentile, which I did, and it put her at the 25th percentile. So this says any student who reads with less than 95% accuracy or is below the 50th percentile for words correct per minute will need to take a code knowledge inventory. And she read with about a 3 as far as expressive reading. There's something that is preventing this student from reading fluently. And so that means to you, that should indicate to you that they need further diagnosing through the code knowledge inventory. So this is the first part that you do. You do this first, and some students don't need anything further than this because they are scoring above that 95% accuracy and above the 50th percentile, and that means you don't need to further do any code knowledge with them. But this student does indicate she needs more because she is not scoring above that 50th percentile. She's in the 25th percentile. So when a student demonstrates challenges with accessing grade level text via an oral reading fluency probe, the next step is to administer a code knowledge assessment and see if the foundational gaps need to be addressed. The code knowledge inventory has students read the words from various spelling pattern categories, read complete sentences, and then write sentences that they hear. And from there, you would record any mistakes that they make from those different inventories and progress through the assessment and take note of the trends that you see so that you know where they may need some additional support. So that would be like your step 3 and step 4 here, where they do that phonics assessment. For P. Smith, also on the lift flowchart, she is reading below the 50th percentile according to reading norms. So that means I follow the flowchart and I administer that 3-part code knowledge that we looked at. Again, that part's not timed. You're just marking the mistakes that student has, and that would begin on page 9 of your administration manual. And let's say I did give P. Smith this. After I give her the code knowledge portion of lift, this is what my information gives me. This is how she performed on each of these. I just gave her this one code knowledge inventory, and I felt like that gave me enough information. And she's struggling significantly with decoding multisyllabic words, which you probably see a lot of with your secondary students. That is often a problem for many of them. So from here, I know that I can put her in some intentional groups with other students who have similar needs to her for some supplemental support. And I can make sure that the educators that are working with her have access to some of the resources that are available to support kids in decoding multisyllabic words. We have some stuff in the LIP library, as well as if you click on the link here, decoding multisyllabic words in 3 through 12 brings you through some guidance of a lot of different activities you can use with students that go through things as simple as syllables all the way to morphology. I also, if y'all could drop that in the chat, one of you, that would be helpful with the guidance. The decoding multisyllabic words in 3 through 12 will also very soon be on this professional learning platform as well. So you'll be able to access all of that there. But this is just to give you some ideas of some resources you could use for these particular students with that particular need. But that's what her profile at a glance looks like. I was able to, from this one profile, this one page, I was able to determine that she is having issues with being able to read fluently, which means she's probably having some problems with comprehension. And I was able to diagnose that multisyllabic words are her biggest struggle. And that is the first thing that I would want to tackle when it comes to supporting her in getting her more proficient in her reading. The other free resource, I'm not going to take you through all of this, but just so you know, the Dibbles 8th edition that Natalie kind of referenced earlier, this is what the website looks like. This is the link. You can also just Google Dibbles 8th. It'll bring you to the University of Oregon, and you'll have access to all of their administration materials for Dibbles. Again, make sure any personnel involved in this is well trained in how to administer and to analyze the information that it is giving you. There should be some time set aside for like professional development if it's needed to make sure that whether you're using Lyft or Dibbles, everyone who is using it knows how to use it and what to do with the information that comes from it. There is a Dibbles PD series that anybody, if they want to learn more about it, that we can send you information to, or you can use this course code right here to get into that course if you are interested in looking at Dibbles more in depth. So that's another reason why I didn't want to go into it on here. We have a course already made for it as well, so you can look at it there. Okay.